What is up, YouTube? Welcome back for another episode of Mortal Realms Monday. So for today's episode 16, we had a look at issue 16, which came with the Sequitors and Castigators. So rather than do another paint scheme for those, I thought I'd give you something a little bit special and paint up this guy from the premium set that came with came for subscriptions. Subscribers to Mortal Realms magazine. So obviously if you're not subscribing and you haven't got this set, then maybe you're collecting this army anyway, so you could have a look and see what you think of the paint job that I do here. So with that being said, let's get into this and take a look. Okay, so to start the model, I've gone ahead and primed it with white undercoat, a white primer, and you can see there that I've already put down the gravel for the base, or the sand for the base that I wanted, and I'm now going in with a very watered down Death Guard green. And the reason I've done this is it will pull down into the recesses and leaving the raised areas lighter tone because of the white undercoat. So if you wanted to speed paint this model, this is a great place to start, as you could essentially get away with doing one coat of this and then a dry brush of some pallid witch flesh or Ushapti bone, a pale colour, just a light dry brush over the top to give some highlights, and you're pretty much there, bar obviously some of the finer details, but for skin tone you'd be there. But for me, I just waited to get some nice even coats on here, so I think I did about 3 coats of this, but more focusing on the tops of the arms, as in not the inside of the forearm but the outside, so the outside of the arms, the back and the front side of the legs, because I wanted to give this guy sort of a darker blotchy effect to the back sides of his skin. So all I do here is, like I say, just a couple of thin down coats over the entire skin area of the model, obviously leaving out the wings and or whatever those little bits are, developing wings, and missing out obviously the bones and things like that. So you'll also notice here that his shoulder pauldron is not attached to his shoulder, and that's so that I could get better access to the area around it and behind it there. So let's skip on and we'll see what this step looks like once it's done. Okay, so once that's done, I've taken some Eshin Grey and I'm mixing in a very small amount of the Archregent Blue. The Eshin Grey does have a slightly bluish tint to it anyway, but I wanted this to have a little bit more of a blue tint. So again, this is very thinly watered down, and I'm now applying, as you can see, over the this broken bit of building here. And again, as with the green tones, this reacts nicely with the white as it sinks into those recesses and the cracks and things, and leaves the higher edges and the raised areas that paler, lighter blue tone. Again, great for speed painting to get a quick bit of stone effect, or a bluish stone effect onto your models. Just undercoat in white and then apply more of a wash rather than a thin down paint. So again, same thing with the Cryptghast himself. I'm applying this all over the stone column here, obviously being careful not to get it onto his fingernails, but that won't matter too much. And I think the only area that I do leave out is the 2 metal pieces. You can see me going around them just here. the hinges. That was it. So again, I think this is just the 1 or 2 coats for this one. I didn't want it too dark. I did like the look of the contrast with the white undercoat, allowing those highlights to show immediately. And I think I am going to do all my these models like this from the premium kit, as I do like the way that the wash sits down in those recesses. Alright, and next up is some Ushapti bone, and for this I'm going to apply it not as thin as the previous paints. This one's just a small amount of water added to it, just to get a nice consistency with it. But I'm going for all the bone areas now, so that will be the bone areas for the wings here, his claws, his talons or nails on his feet, as well as the spikes that go down his back, and the skull that he has, or the couple of skulls that he has attached to his waist. So again, with this, it's only 1 or 2 thin coats. It doesn't need a lot. And we can now move on to the next stage. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to have a darker tone to the back of this miniature, as well as the front side of his legs and the top side of his arms. So what I've got here is some Athonian camo shade, and I'm using it a sort of a mix between a glaze and a wash. I'm letting it pool into the recesses a little bit, and you'll notice that for some of it I may go onto the lighter areas, but for the most part I'm just applying thin down layers over the areas that I want dark. I think I apply probably 7 or 8 layers of this, because I really wanted that dark sort of back and the top of his head and his arms, so that it was in contrast to the paler, lighter tone of his chest, the backs of his legs and the underside of his arms. So you can see here, I'm just going around, obviously being careful not to go onto any of the bone that I've already painted up. Just getting it to sit nicely in those recesses, and you'll notice that it is also staining the lighter tones that the white gave us. Okay, so now onto the dry brushing to get some of those highlight areas. For this I'm using a 50-50 mix of Ushapti bone and the Death Guard green, and as you can see I'm just brushing this all over the front of the chest area, and then I'll also do the underarms and the backs of the legs, or at least the one that we can see. And here I'm using an Army Painter brand dry brush, as I do prefer the beveled or the angled tip that this has. It's more akin to Games Workshop's base brush rather than their dry brush. So as you can see, I'm just giving it a light brushing on all the areas that I want to come up paler in tone. So I get a nice contrast between that dark back and that lighter underbelly. You'll also notice that I applied a thinner wash of the Screamer Pink to the inside of the ears. I felt that having them in the lighter green may not have been quite as effective. Yeah, I just didn't think it would look quite as nice, so I went with that paler sort of washed out pink to the inside of the ears instead, and I think it works well. It brings that pink across from the arms up to the head. Right, so now it's time to paint the winged areas here, and for this I'm using Screamer Pink. Again, thinned down with a small amount of water, just a couple of drops, just to get it to apply nicely, and obviously being careful again not to go onto that Ishapti bone, but not being too worried if I do. It's just, you know, dab it off with a finger quickly, and if there's any stain from it then I can just go back over with the Ishapti. But as long as you're careful, if something is as open as this, it shouldn't be too difficult to not, you know, to avoid the bone there. The under area here is a little bit more difficult to get to, as it is the underside. In hindsight, I think I couldn't leave. I think the that arm is actually part of the back, but the right hand arm that's attached to the stone pillar, I probably would have left off so that I could get under there a little bit easier, but it wasn't too much of a problem. So as always, just a one or two thin coats of this. I think with the Screamer Pink it is quite a strong colour, and it does go down fairly smooth, so just a couple of thin down layers is more than enough to get a nice even coverage. Right, so next up I went ahead and used some more Athonian Camo Shade, and this time more as a wash over the entire model, to bring back those deep recesses and the definition in the muscles, as well as to smooth out the dry brushing on the front. As most of you probably already know, dry brushing tends to leave a little bit of a chalky look, which sometimes is okay, but I find for skin tones it's better to go back in with a wash that you can use for your darker areas, and what that will do is smooth out and take off the edge of some of that chalkiness, and it just helps it blend in a little bit smoother. Okay, now you can see I'm applying a wash over the stone area here. This is a mix of non-oil and some Athonian Camo Shade. It's about 2 parts Camo Shade to 1 part non-oil, just so it's got that slightly darker green tint to it, and this will sit down nicely in those recesses and really make everything stand out. Right, so after applying a few more glazes of the Athonian Camo Shade and non-oil mix, you can see that he now has a much darker skin tone on his back and his face than he does on the front. And all I'm doing now is going back in with a small amount of Dawnstone mixed with some of the Eshin Grey, just to pick off some of these edges on these ruins here. And then once those are done, I'll then go back in again with a slightly thinned down, a slightly heavier Dawnstone dry brush over the top of this. So this one's just to pull out some of the edges, and then I'll mix a little bit more Dawnstone into the mix, and that will really make it pop out. Okay, so I'm now going in with some of the Death Guard green mixed with the Ushapti bone, and I'm just picking off some edge highlights on some of the raised portions of the muscles here, just to give them a little bit more definition. Obviously the multiple layers of Athonian camo shade and oil mix has darkened up nicely, but it's also left it looking just a little bit too flat for my liking. So I'm just going in and adding some structured highlights. Okay, so now it's time to add some shading to the bones, and for this I'm just simply taking some Rhinox flesh shade, and I'm just running this up the bones and the claws and leaving it focused a little bit more towards the base of each of those areas. I prefer the Rhinox flesh shade for this rather than the Agrax earth shade, as it has a little bit of a reddish tone to it, which I find just looks better for bone. The Agrax earth shade I find just tends to look a little bit muddier, which is okay for skulls and things like that. But when you're trying to do living bone, I think that the reddish tint looks a little bit better than the Agrax earth shade. So obviously I'm applying this over everything that is done with the Ushapti bone. So that's the two skulls, his claws, the bones running down his wings, his teeth, and his bone necklace that he has around his neck. Okay, so now to add some shading to the wings, I'm just taking some Druki Violet, and I'll apply this in a wash just over the wing here, letting that settle down right up against the bones and just some of those darker areas. This produces a nice shadow, as well as leaving a little bit of a highlight area along that peak of the curve of the wing. I'm not too worried about getting this on the bone area. Obviously I have let the previous wash on the bones dry, so that I'm not mixing the purple into the flesh tone. So I was a little bit unsure as to what colour to do this cloth. I did originally plan to do the wings in the same red as this, but I thought that might be too much of the same colour, so I decided to go with a base of Mephiston red for this, so that it was a little bit in contrast to the wings rather than the same. So again, just some nice thin down paint. I think again just a couple of thin layers is more than enough to get an even coverage with this. And obviously this is the red cloth that covers the back side of him, as well as the bit that comes off the front over the front of the skull there. Okay, so with the red done, it's time to take some Rhinox Hide, and I'm just applying this to all of the fur areas that are coming off of him. So it's the back of the thighs, and around his arms, and the base of his, or the back of his feet, just at the top of them. And this will just give us a nice brown base to add some basic highlight to. I didn't want anything too contrasting with this. Okay, so now I'm just going in and painting all the areas that I want to be metal in Abaddon black. So that is the chain and the spike, which I originally thought was bone. It wasn't until I paint the front here that I realised that this spike was metal. So that's the chain along the front, and down the back, as well as the blade for his broken sword. And that there preps us for the silver to do over the top. So I think here I'm just applying a wash to the necklace here. Oh no, sorry, this was the Rhinox Hide that I'm applying to the rope portion of the necklace, so that we can get some highlight on that and make it look more like rope once we're done. Okay, so now I'm taking some Druchii Violet and I'm applying this over the red. I prefer the Druchii Violet to the Caribou Crimson, as it has that darker tone to it, obviously where it has some of the blue mixed in there with it. And I feel that it just gives off, it just looks better as a shadow for reds than what the Caribou Crimson does. So obviously I'm applying this over the red area. You may notice that some of my painting, in particular with this model, but it is with any models that I haven't done before, tends to be a little bit sort of all over the place. Obviously this step I could have done when I was using the shade on the wings, but at the time I wasn't 100% sure of what I wanted for the cloth here. So you know, I'm just showing you guys that this is how I paint, and I'm sure that, you know, many of you out there are probably the same when it comes to painting miniatures, especially if you haven't done them before, that you may be a little bit sort of backwards and forwards between them, but it is what it is. Okay, so now I'm moving on to highlighting the bone areas, and for this I'm just using a thinned down flayed one flesh, and you can see that I'm applying it and then wiping it off just ever so slightly, and I find that this gives a little bit of a blend to the bone there. But this is thin enough that you should be able to get this to go in one stroke and have a nice gradient to it. So obviously just the tops of his toe claws there. As well as his claws on the back of the column there, and you can see that the dark green into that original blue wash on there, at least I think it really stands out nice on that stone. So just be careful not to get any on the pink purple area there, and picking off obviously the spine, and then moving on to the skulls. Okay, so I'm now just giving a light brushing of Mournfang Brown over the tops of the fur. There isn't a lot of paint on the brush here, it's just enough so that as I gently pull across that it doesn't seep down into the recesses, but it does pick off the high points of the fur. You could do this with a dry brush, but the fur is in such small areas that I find that this is, you know, a little bit more accurate. And at this point the model is really coming along now. Okay, so I'm now highlighting down the centre of the wings, which is the most upper raised part, as well as the area around the holes in the wings there, with a 50-50 mix of Screamer Pink and Pink Horror. And this is just to give a little bit of a highlight to those areas. I don't like to use heavy contrasting highlights on my models. I do prefer to use a little bit, something a little bit more subtle, just a slight variation, and then maybe for some extreme edges, you know, sharp edges, then I'll use a little bit more of an extreme highlight. But you'll notice that this is barely off with the colour, and now I'm just dabbing it here just to remove some of the paint, and just it sort of gives it a sort of a feathered effect, and I find that it just blends a little bit, looks a little bit nicer with the blend. You'll also notice that I've gone ahead and painted the base with a thin down Mornfang brown. This is in preparation for the highlights to go over the top of this. I wanted a little bit more of a dead earth look to it. Okay, so now I'm going in with some slightly thinned down Evil Sun's Scarlet, just as a highlight on top of that Mephiston red. And again, this is slightly thinned so that it applies smoothly, but also so that it's not so contrasting against the previous red there. As between the two, the Evil Sun Scarlet is quite a little bit redder and brighter than the Khorne red, and as I said earlier, I don't like high contrasting highlights and mid-tones. I prefer them to have a little bit more of a blend. You'll also notice that the hilt of the dagger was done. That was just a quick 2-second thing off camera. It's such a small piece, and that was just done with some thin down Screaming Bell, and I won't do anything else to that, as because it had the white undercoat, as with the greens, that just sort of settled down into the recess and the twists of the handle, and left its own highlights. So it was just a quick, nice, simple piece with that. Okay, so now I'm taking some Iron Breaker, and I'm just going into all the silver metallic areas. I could use bolt gun metal for this, but I prefer the slightly more silvery tone of the Iron Breaker to the bolt gun metal. So obviously this is applied to all the areas that I painted black earlier, which is the dagger, the chains, and the bolt that goes through his chest. And I'll also apply that on his pauldron. And now I'm taking some Eshin Grey, and I'm just edge highlighting some of the black leather strap areas. Again, using my finger just to take off some of the excess, so that it's not such a strong contrast with the black. Okay, so now I'm going in with some Death Guard green and a medium dry brush from Games Workshop, and I'm applying this, as you can see, over all of the base to give it this more sort of dead ground, dead earth type look. And then once this is done, I'll then go back over the top with a mix of the Death Guard green and some Ushabti bone, and as you can see here, it just picks out and gives it another lighter tone to the top of that Death Guard green and brown look, and gives it a bit more of a sort of an ash waste and graveyard look. I do leave the rim of the base on this with the Mornfang brown, and that's just so that it fits in with the rest of my armies. I tend to do all my bases with the brown trim around the edge, just from personal preference. Okay, so here you'll see that I've gone ahead and primed the shoulder guard with Abaddon black before affixing it to the model. This is so that any areas on the inside that I can't quite get to, dark, and you know, they won't stand out. And what I'm doing now is going around the small shield embossment that's in the middle, as well as leaving the outer edges black, and I'm just applying some iron breaker, or I do believe actually this was Runefang steel, but it may have been the iron breaker, over the whole piece. I did do the back of the guard in that, but I then decided later on to do the gold trim around the edge there, and paint the back in gold as well. So I'm now applying some Balthasar gold around the edge of this. I didn't want to do the whole thing in the silver. I felt that I wanted a bit of a two-tone contrast with it, just so that it stood out a little bit more. And I also wanted to try something new with the silver that I personally hadn't done before. So yeah, I just wanted the gold to stand out in contrast. Okay, so once that was done, it was time to take some Nuln Oil and just apply this to the silver areas, and obviously you can see the top of the handle here, just to give it a little bit of a dirty look. I didn't go back in and highlight these with silver, as I wanted them to have a, you know, an actual dirty, ancient, older look to them. So I just went in with the Nuln Oil. This is a thinned down mix of Nuln Oil. It's 50-50 oil and water that I have in a small pot, and then I have my regular Nuln Oil aside, so it doesn't leave that oily stain that Nuln Oil tends to. So for the final step on this, I'm just taking some Ethermatic Blue, and I thought about trying this over the silver to see if we could get or if I could get a silvery blue tone to the silver area. And as you'll see in the final photos, it actually came out really effective, because of the thin nature of the contrast paint. It settled down into a couple of the dents and scratches that are modelled onto the shoulder pauldron, and so it darkened those areas up a little bit, and obviously stained but seeped away from the raised areas, allowing that silver to show through but with a blue tint to it. And I was actually quite happy with the results of it. So I think here I'm just taking up some of the excess, just so it doesn't stain too much. Right, so here is the finished model. I've applied a couple of dead grass tufts to the base there, just to, you know, add a little bit of something to the base. But there he is, the finished guy. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If there are any sort of techniques or anything that you want to know in detail about from this video, let me know down in the comments below, and I'll see if I can make a little bit more of an in-depth video for it, focusing on maybe specific areas of how I did certain things. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that thumbs up button. I'm getting close to my first goal of 100 subscribers now, so if you're not subscribed, please consider hitting that subscribe button. It would be much appreciated, and obviously would be very helpful towards reaching that goal. But more importantly, if you hit that notification bell, you'll get notifications of when new videos are uploaded, which for Mortal Realms is every Monday. I am a few issues behind what is released in the shops, due to being a premium subscriber and subscribing a little bit late and having some delays and stuff, but we are getting there. If there's anything you didn't like about the video, then please let me know in the comments below. This is all new to me. I am still learning, you know, I'm trying to improve, but I can only do that with feedback from you guys. So rather than just giving it a thumbs down, let me know in the comments as well. You know, I'm a big boy, I can take it, and it helps me improve future videos. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, keep painting those minis, guys.